As you hear me talk, these are just my rules. If there were 20 artists up here, all 20 of them would have a different viewpoint of what their art is all about. And it depends on what they're doing it for, too. Some are doing it for competition, some are doing it for a collection in museums, some are doing it for prickly money, they're just, some are doing it for a gallery. So it's all a little different when you look at a piece of artwork up there. My two basic rules are, first of all, you've got to be connected emotionally and part of what you are doing. And as I will start explaining, that becomes so important to me. You've got to be emotionally connected to what you are doing, and very deeply. And the both of you have to be the same. The other thing's a really simple one. You've got to be able to draw. It's so simple. There are a dozen at least medias here, two-dimensional medias. I was able to do all of them because I have a little bit of drawing ability. If you have a little bit, you can do a lot. And I don't want to see somebody who can just draw an incredible aspen tree or an incredible rose, but beyond that, they can't do a hand or a face, etc. So drawing is so, those are two of my pet peeves. You're going to hear me go back and forth. It's amazing, this show as it came together, it's all very, very related, even from day one, all the way through. And even though the things look a little different, perhaps, you're going to hear me refer back and forth constantly to three different things. First one is Michael Workman, who's an incredible painter out of Utah that's been my mentor, and I finally got to meet him 2 years ago. We didn't talk about painting, we talked about what he wrote about, because he's very religious, very spiritual. And his quote is that there is a spiritual blueprint beneath everything on this earth. And I've really taken that to heart. There's a spiritual blueprint. And you can, for the word spiritual, you can use anything you want, tremendous energy, karma, God, whatever word you need to use. But that has really stuck with me, and you'll hear me repeat that over and over again. The other thing is, this is kind of an odd one perhaps, where I was born. This is a strange statement, but I will tell you this first too. I should have told you this right off the bat, and I'll tell you at the end. My art is entirely wrapped around my life. And my life is totally wrapped around my art. There's no switching between the two of them. Never has been. I was born on my great-grandmother's little farm on her little 60 acres in northwest Missouri on my great-great-great-grandparents' homestead land. The second I was born there, I'm now attuned to the land. The earth and the land, that's what makes this whole show happen. That's my spiritual blueprint underneath. So that, and you're going to hear me talk a little bit, quite a bit about ancestors and so forth, and like, why is he talking about his ancestors and his grandkids and stuff? Well, it's because we're all tied together from that very moment that I was born there. So you hear me refer to the blueprint. You hear me refer to the fact where I was born on a land. The earth is, is what is so important to me. The other thing is a little drawing. It's very small, but maybe you can see it and you can see it later. Just a little simple drawing of a bird's nest in the wintertime. Most important piece I've ever done. Took me 10 minutes probably to do it. Has more stories behind it than anything else. I talked to my little granddaughter, and I said, now Grandpa's going to talk about metaphors. You know what those are? Yep, I do. I do, Grandpa. I know what those are. Symbolism and metaphors. That's what the whole show's about. You may enjoy these pieces for what they are, and that's great. That's fine. They are not what they seem. They are symbols for something else, and they're metaphors for something else. The little bird nest is just a metaphor for life. Our lives are 70, 80 years old. Little bird didn't last too many weeks probably. His was just a few weeks and a month, but it's the same metaphor. And he built that nest layer, you're going to hear me say this over and over, layer by layer by layer, and that's what we do. That's all we do in life. We just build layer by layer experiences. Good ones, bad ones, everything else. So there's a tremendous contrast. Those are the two things. When you hear me talk about layers, that's what I'm talking about. Building that little nest layer by layer. And we'll talk about what happens when the snow comes later. And it's the same thing in life. So you hear me talk about the blueprint. You hear me talk about where I was born, and now that I'm part of the earth, really, on that special ancestral land. Then you hear me talk about layers, putting layers up. Now, 74, 75, I have to do a master's thesis. Well, what are you going to do? You guys were brilliant, so you knew right off the bat. These are dear friends from college. Well, what I say at the very beginning, you do what? You do what you know, and what you're in tune to, and what is part of you. It's got to be part of you, and you got to be part of it. So what would you do? Well, I grew up on the farm, the rural parts in Missouri, so the animals became a pretty obvious thing. What I was trying to do was to do portraits with the animals, really, trying to give them human traits. Some of them worked probably pretty well. The little pig I always thought was pretty good because he has awfully smug look to him, if you will look at him later on. The big chicken, which Jean claims as her own, if you've been around roosters, you know, there is that real attitude. Could be a real attitude in Missouri too, possibly. Interesting about, and the kids haven't ever heard, when I was 3 or 4, my mom and dad bought me a little chick for Easter, like everybody does. It was a little rooster. Man, that thing turned out to be big, and he was mean. And, you know, if you look at that rooster, you know, there's a little attitude in that rooster's face. Chased me all the time. My mom and I, that thing was really mean. And then one day he was chicken noodle soup. that ended that. But here's the first time I'm starting to think about the use of symbolism and metaphors instead of just what you see there in the actual image. I was just starting to read Andrew Wyeth, and most of you know Andrew Wyeth, Christina's World, the figure at the bottom of the hill trying to climb up the hill. One of the most popular, that sounds good, one of the most popular American painters. And most people are drawn to him because of his realism and the rural scenes and so forth. But if you start reading his books, I've got a huge library, and I amazingly read more than I look at the pictures, which is a little strange for me, because it's the reading that's important. The more I start reading about Wyeth, all of his stuff is metaphors. It's all metaphors. And it's his youth, you know, there's a lot of stuff about his father was killed tragically in a train wreck, and I think it affected him greatly, probably. But all his work is symbolism and metaphors. And the more I read that, he'd done a wonderful series on Kerner's farm, the old German neighbor of his. And I thought, you know, I'm going to do a series. I think I wanted now to get into a series. So who would be a really unusual person? Jean's Uncle Olin, white, was certainly that. Because in the 50s and 60s even, what a character, because he was one of the nation's leading mule breeders. Now in those days it was not a hobby. I mean, he bred mules and sold them all over the United States. He was a coon hunter. He always had about a half a dozen coon dogs all chained up for his coon hunts, played the fiddle. Kind of a character, big, tough, and as Al will know, not real warm and fuzzy. And I said, God, what an interesting concept of this. This would be quite a guy. So I told everybody in the family, I'm going to ask him if I can follow him for a couple of years shooting photographs. And their response was, good luck. He's going to knock you right off the hay rack. And I remember talking to him, because I would stop there every summer to see him and so forth, these livestock. And I remember him walking along with the bucket, you know, I said, oh, I'd kind of like to follow you and take photographs if I could. That's fine. And kept right on going and didn't say a word. And for over 2 years, every time I was back there, I shot photographs of him. He didn't seem to care at all. He just did his work. Out of that series starts to become some very powerful metaphors and symbolism. The little dog, I think, is one of the better pieces I've done, because everybody thinks a dog's a pet. And dogs want to give unconditional love, right? If you look pretty closely at that little guy, he wants you to pet him so bad. You don't pet coon dogs. You don't treat them with any kind of love. But yet, if you look at he wants so badly for you to pet him. And he's looking up at Uncle Olin, and he's not going to get it. I thought it was one of the best little pieces I thought that I'd done. The most popular piece that came out of it was the Uncle Olin piece that you see over here. Unbelievably popular, because if you ever were on a farm at all, this is what happens. That's all they do all day. They go in and out of gates, in and out of gates, in and out of gates. And as soon as people saw that, it became literally a universal image for the farmer. Because there's no face, but if you look from the back, that's everybody's grandfather. And that's what we were told over and over and over and over again. And the more we, finally his brother, or his son and I, because this piece was so popular, everybody wanted to buy. This is not the original. That's a G-clay print. The original doesn't leave the house. Matter of fact, somebody said, "Are you serious? 75% of this has never been out of your house?" I said, "No, it hasn't. It's never been seen before. It's all been stored away. Go back in storage probably again." Robert White, his son, FBI agent, said, "Oh, that thing is so popular. What if we made a poster of it?" Now, I don't do commercial at all. The world's worst salesman. I'll try to talk you out of buying a piece. I'm terrible at it. I don't like that at all. He said, "Let's do a commercial, something." Robert, we are very close because he's very much of the land also. Very, very much. And we talk anytime he comes back, we talk for hours. And he writes old country music hymns. They're incredible poems. So what he did was take these overalls of me, and he's talking about so much of this is just the passage of time, the passage of life is what this whole show's about. It's just that passage of time. And when you get to be 70, you start really thinking about passage of time. And all it is about is talking about the old farmer who now was overalls and had, 60 acres and a mule, and he was able to make a living off of that. Just fine. And now, the tractors are getting bigger, you got to open up the gates bigger, what's going to happen to me, my overalls and me? So that's what the poem is about. In 1986, he walked into his barn to feed his horses and died of a massive heart attack. I took this photograph 2 years before that. You guys know the answer, you can't raise your hand. But there's something about this piece that, after I looked at it. So many of the pieces, I'm unconscious about it when I'm doing it, and once I finally get it done, then it hits me. He's walking into blackness. His head's gone into the blackness. And I did that 2 years before he died. It didn't dawn on me for a long time. That's kind of one of the, wow, oh. People relate so much to this, and we had sold tons of these things. And people would come up. Russell Chatham, Tom knows Russell Chatham, Utah painter, talks about you've got to have so much emotion into your piece. If you can bring a tear, you finally succeeded. So many people came up to us with tears and said, "That's my dad. I've got to have 3 copies of that. That's my grandfather. Can I have it?" So it's great to know it for that, but here's the other thing that's behind it. 1974, his youngest boy, Tommy, probably 27, 28 years old, was a music teacher in south part of Missouri. He didn't show up for school one morning, and they went to his apartment and found that he'd had an aneurysm over the weekend, and he was barely alive, and he lasted 2 more days and died. Aunt Lucille went to the little Amity church, and here's where we're building layers. Here we mentioned Amity. I've got tremendous roots where I live right now. Jean's got those tremendous ancestral roots in Amity. She had a support group at the little Amity church where Jean went to school as a child, where the Amity school was that I was in 2nd grade and she was in 3rd grade. My life's gone downhill ever since. We still go to the Amity church when we're back there. We still go to that little country Amity church. So Lucille had a tremendous support group with those people at Amity to try to figure out this tragedy. Uncle Olin had no friends. He had hunting buddies, but that's a whole different deal. So how was he going to cope with this? Because he was this big, strong, I can do anything man. So how was he going to cope with that? The farmer said that at daybreak for several weeks after, they would see him coming from the cemetery. He had no other ways of trying to cope with what happened. So that piece, and there's no answer for this, it's your answer. Is he stuck behind that gate? Is he opening up the gate and moving to the next field? Is he closing that gate from the other field? That's what the piece is about. And it's your answer. There's a lot of answers that I guess could go with what that piece is. So it's a great piece. People love it for a lot of things, but it is dealing with that situation, and which is what he's doing. John Goodrow, many of you know John Goodrow, a tremendous photographer. Christy Goodrow is his wife, the director of the Evergreen Chorale. Minister and a great friend, and I had him walk through with me talking about it. And he said, wow, he said, it shows the ultimate of the power of the human and the frailty of the human. He said, it's amazing they're both right there at that time. I'll tell you about this piece at the very end today. I'll point out one other one. This is, a little bit later because it's a pastel, obviously, because that was quite a bit later. And a lot of people love it for, that horse, and the one's kind of looking, one's eating nice and relaxed. Well, what's the other one doing? What's important in this one is not this picture, it's what's over here. What's he see? You see Andrew Wyeth do that with Distant Thunder. Betsy, his wife, was laying there, but she turned up to listen to Distant Thunder. You hear me talk about suggest, but don't describe. Okay, suggest in a picture, but don't describe it. So all I'm doing is suggesting. There's something else going on way over here. I've done watercolors for a long time, and they're very tight. They're almost like Wyeth in a way. And after a while, I kind of got, I'm spending so much energy on the technique, and sometimes that happens. I've seen some pastel people just drown their pastels with pastel. They get so much on there. See, watercolor people have all kinds of tricks. Man, watercolors can do a lot of fancy tricks. I've seen a couple oil painters, I love their work, but then you got to putting so many strokes in there, I couldn't even tell what it was. Sometimes the media takes over. You got to be careful. And I thought, I'm spending too much energy on this. maybe I need a different media that's a little quicker. Everything you see in here has been self-taught. Yeah, I have 2 degrees, and that speaks pretty badly of my learning curve. Everything in here is self-taught. Jean says if you would just go to a class, you might learn something about how to do a pastel. Sometimes not knowing how you're supposed to do it is as important as the rules of it. Because I can kind of draw, you can do most of these. I just pick them up and start in. Thought, well, I've never tried pastel. Maybe I'll try that. Picked up some pastels at Meininger's, I said, where's the paper? I don't know what you guys use for paper. Showed me where the paper was. Took it home, and the pieces were pretty traditional. They were like the horses back there, basically. And there's a couple pastels of the cowboys, too. So they were pretty traditional pieces. They were much quicker, I found. Then one day I'm in Santa Fe, and I go into Gerald Peters' huge gallery, and I go into the small gallery of contemporary painters, present-day painters. And here's a Michigan painter named John Felsing, and I'd never seen anything like it in my life. They were small pieces. They were the softest, most gentle. They were so soft. They were a ghost of a landscape. I've heard that definition somewhere. They were so unbelievably soft. I don't believe what he's doing. I spent an hour there, went to lunch, came back, looked at him for another hour. I just could not believe what this guy was doing. The next 3 or 4 years is going to really change. It's going to really change everything, and it just starts and really starts rolling. My little nest is turning into, the next 3 years are going to be a 3-story nest. There's a lot of stuff getting wrapped around it. So I started doing these pastels for a while, and a lot of people are familiar with some of those really soft pieces. And then I'm in Santa Fe again, and I'm at an oddball little bookstore gallery, and I pick up a book, I open it up, and it's the French Barbizon School. And I'm sorry, I was so dumb. I didn't even realize the history, the art history of what the French Barbizon School was. Mid-1800s, the painters got sick and tired of the rules in Paris that we're getting out of here. They go to the Fontainebleau Forest outside of Paris, a little town there called Barbizon, and that's where they set up. Millet was there first. Millet, you would know if you saw his work. It's in every school. The gleaners, those 2 ladies down picking up wheat on the ground, you see them all the time, that print. Or the sower, you see those all the time. That was Millet. He was there first, started the figures. After that, Corot was probably the biggest name, and Rousseau came in. and they started doing landscape. But their landscapes up till that time were simply the backdrop for something mystical or religious painting. That's all they were. They were backdrops. They were just there as a backdrop. So these guys say, wow, I think the landscape has its own soul. And as I opened in this book, I'm going, wow, I don't believe what I'm seeing here. Wound up getting 3 of the all outdated books. Had to go to Paris. I think we got one out of London, I think. And those are kind of part of my Bible now. My library at home is all 19th century painters. I have very few contemporary people. It's all 19th century. So now I'm looking at the Barbizon School and going, wow, I can't believe what these guys are doing with landscapes. And they're really making the landscape, it has the soul of its own, kind of. So I'm just starting to look at that and painting a little bit. And I knew about George Ennis. George Ennis is the godfather of all painters in the 19th century. I-N-N-E-S-S. And I knew a little bit about him. And I was in New York City at the Spanderman Gallery to see Willie Matthews' work, of all things. I happened to be there, and I knew several galleries in New York, and I wanted to see Willie's stuff. It's odd because in the middle of Manhattan, here's cowboy work. So I went to see it, and I'm looking in the corner over here, and I see this, like a poster, and I start reading about it, and I'm going, wow, they just had a tonalist painters here. Now, tonalism is T-O-N-A-L-I-S-T, tonalism. Now, tonalism, I had to write all these down just to think about it. They're doing the transitional time of day. It's dawn and it's dusk. It's a very transitional time. You do not see very clear shapes at that time. They studied with the Barbizon School. Some of them knew the Barbizon people. They studied with them. Their palettes are usually browns and grays. There's nothing bright. You do not see that bright sunny effect with the tonalist people. They do the suggest rather than the describe. Suggest something and let you figure it out rather than describe it. Ennis came up with the suggest to me reality but never show me, which is a tremendous change from that chicken back there, and where I'm painting every single tiny detail of it to where I'm starting to get up to here, where the detail is no longer important. It's, again, some people call it poetic. Their stuff was very calm drama, and that sounds like an oxymoron, but they really were. It's very calm. So now I'm on a roll. I've got, Wyatt's symbolism and his metaphors. I've discovered John Felsing, this painter, unbelievable style that he has. I found the tonalist painters. Some painters will bring up Crane, Bruce Crane and John Murphy, as big as Ennis, basically. Again, they're always just suggesting the reality. You can't really, like I say, dawn and dusk and just before and just after there's not a lot of detail in it. They're very, very soft pieces. And they had a giant hardbound book at Spanderman. And that is now dog-eared because I read and I read. That's my workshops. My books are my workshops. As I read about what they're doing and look at what they're doing, that's what he's doing. That's what he's doing. So this is where we start to get to this point of what you're seeing up here now. And then the last straw, I'm back for a wedding. Alice Boy and I'm at the Brooklyn Art Museum. I pick up a book on the Hudson River School. A lot of people remember that from the early 1800s. Get those big massive paintings of the big beautiful trees in the virgin land of America. And here was a little teeny thing of a man, showing how overpowering the landscape is compared to man. So I knew about them. He was about Thomas Cole, who was the founder. These are very early 1800 people. And it's interesting, because I'll just read this. Thomas Cole said, the purpose and power of art is to clothe a meaning or a philosophy. And I'm going, well, gee, I was thinking that too. This is what I mean, things come together. Things come together. So I'm reading that all their stuff is symbolism. Matter of fact, in 1824, they printed a list of about 15 items that you could read your painting. You could literally read it. A stump cut off was man destroying the woods, the environment. An old tree that has simply fallen over is old age. Obviously, dawn, you can guess. is the rebirth. Dusk is the end. They would have two deer. One would be getting a drink of water, maybe in the river. The other would have its eyes up looking around. Simply meant that man was intruding. And I went, I think I used that one before too somewhere. It's always interesting when you see stuff and you go, gosh, these people are awesome. And I actually, with my 85 IQ, figured that out. That's amazing. That is amazing. So now I've got all of this stuff coming together and realizing the Hudson River is all just strictly symbolism. All symbolism.